Okay, well, I think we've all had a exciting few days. Is that the right word? Trying to work out what the implications were from the announcement on Monday. I think in the true style of the government, they followed what is now their normal pattern, just in case you want a bit of a warning for the next set of announcements. They generally start leaking things, briefing, sorry, to the media about 4 days before the announcement. So anything that you see that comes out sort of Thursday before the next announcement, which is probably going to be, so it'll be July the 12th will be the next announcement, but the week 4 days before is usually when they start leaking stuff to the papers. If they appear on BBC Breakfast and say something, then that's generally going to be what's happening. So yeah, they managed to brief us all in quite well before the event itself. So I think by the time it came to Monday, most of us were aware of what was going to be said. But right, I've got a little presentation to kind of cover what I'm about to say, but the main thing you need is a FAQs thing that I've just published on our website. So at the end of this, or at some point, Emily's going to put in the chat a link to that document so that you can download it and digest at your leisure, because there is quite a lot that I've had to go through and update, and some of it's a bit technical because it's to do with legislation and things like that. So I'm just going to run through a presentation, you know, a little bit, but I will also just be chatting as well. So give me a sec. Oh my goodness, the tech is against me today. Right. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to go over is what Boris actually said in his announcement and what it means for us as an industry. Now, the roadmap itself was always based on 4 tests. And if I can share my screen with you there. Okay. So the 4 tests that were needed: vaccine rollout going very well, but he did say we're now in a race of vaccine versus virus. Vaccine efficacy is much better than we first hoped, but the problem we've got is that you need 2 jabs for it to be effective against the Delta variant. So the government are now massively ramping up the efforts to get 2 jabs into everybody and make sure that the whole of the adult population has been offered 2 jabs by the 19th of July, which is where we got our new date from. The infection rates are climbing rapidly. That was the 3rd of the test. But at the moment the evidence is showing that the leak is weakened between infection rates and hospitalizations. It's not severed. We were hoping for severed, but it's weakened. So they just need the extra 4 weeks to allow more vaccinations, double vaccinations to be done, and to therefore get more evidence on the break, hopefully, between infection and hospitalization. Because in a way, it doesn't matter if we have 10,000 cases a day if none of them are ending up in hospital. There is a risk that you get more mutations if you get more cases. But, you know, at some point, as Chris Whitty said, we're going to have to learn to live with this. So, you know, as long as the link between cases and vaccination, hospitalizations is broken, then those infection rates actually become less relevant. Variants is the 4th test. Obviously, Delta is our main worry, and that is now the main virus that we have in this country. It's overtaken the Kent one that we had. So basically we failed. We failed on the 4 tests, which is why they've postponed our reopening until July the 19th. He did say that it was a terminus date, whereas previously dates have been given as no earlier than. And he was, you know, he said the word confident a number of times that they are going to be able to open up on the 19th of July. The only TBC there is a new and unexpected variant that we can't possibly know about. If everything else continues as it is, he was very confident that that will be an end date when when the legal restrictions are lifted. Now, when he says legal restrictions, I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, but the important thing to know is that the restrictions refer to the numbers of people that are allowed to gather and in which circumstances and what venues are allowed to open. Face coverings and social distancing are separate to those restrictions. They don't necessarily follow. However, when he was asked about it in the press conference, he did seem to suggest that they would go hand in hand. So it's just that physically the legislation is different, but hopefully they'll deal with it all at the same time. So what I thought we'd do is have a quick look at where we are now in step 3, because that's what's all over my feed and all over my phone. Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? So there's quite a lot of ifs, buts, maybes and grey, but in a very basic summary, if it's a business event in step 3, we can do lots. We can do up to 1,000 people indoors or 50% of the venue capacity. And if it's an outdoor event, we can do up to 4,000 or 50% of the venue's capacity, subject to a COVID secure risk assessment. So that involves things like breakouts, access areas, entrances, catering. So it's not sort of easy enough just to say, well, the ballroom will hold 400 normally, it's therefore we'll do 200, and that is a safe and permissible event. If you've got a teeny weeny foyer that you couldn't possibly socially distance 200 people in. So it is an overall numbers assessment, but they are the guidelines. So in theory, you know, there's quite a lot of scope for quite a lot of stuff still to happen. There is, however, quite a lot of small print and guidance and extra information that we need to think about. Just to finish off on this slide, so within those events, private dining and gala dinners are included. So they are permitted at step 3 with the following caveats. So I spent most of Monday and a bit of yesterday deep in the actual legislation text. And the restrictions that exist are for 6 people or 2 households indoors and 30 people outdoors. Okay, so that's just the legal restrictions. However, they are listing a whole list of exemptions where you're allowed to gather for more than that. And one of those exemptions is for work purposes. The legislation uses the term reasonably necessary. So there is also an exemption for weddings, which currently maxes them at 30, but on the 21st of June, that exemption will stay for weddings, but the limit is going to be removed. So there will be no limits for the numbers at weddings from a legal perspective. Again, the numbers that are permitted come down to what your venue can hold safely. Within their capacity and social distancing. So that's the legal position. We have an exemption for reasonably necessary work purposes that feeds those numbers you just saw on the previous slide. So the guidance is 50% or 1,000 or 4,000. In the guidance, there's no mention of that word reasonably necessary. It in fact lists out that the permitted events in permitted venues are conferences, trade shows, exhibitions, charity auctions, private dining, such as charity, gala dinners and award ceremonies, and corporate hospitality. So what I've been saying to clients, there's a lot of summer barbecue, staff reward, customer reward type events planned that now fall in this awkward step 3 window. It is ultimately a decision for each company to make, because guidance and law is open to interpretation. But for me, if you could honestly, hand on heart, I just hit my microphone then, sorry if I gave you all a blast, justify that your event fits under the banner of corporate hospitality, for example, or it fits under an awards ceremony, then that would be a very strong justification if an inspector turned up to say, I've read the guidance, it says that this is permitted, this is why my event fits in this guidance. Okay, so that would be my advice for anyone who has, a more social style event, but that very much has business objectives aimed at rewarding individuals, building morale, boosting relationships, fostering more productive workforce, all that good ROI stuff that we would do anyway to justify event spend. It needs to be there to justify a business event, under the corporate hospitality or awards or that sort of thing. So that really, for me, sums up what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Private events would be needed to stick to those top restrictions, so 6 indoors or 30 outdoors, unless there's another exemption they can apply. So significant life events doesn't include birthday parties, I'm afraid. It's more for religious events, and of course weddings that we've mentioned. So that's a brief overview of the legal and guidance position. In terms of how we actually do it or what we do, we are still at business events expected to enable and kind of enforce, but that's the wrong word, but encourage social distancing between households. They've relaxed the guidance on social distancing between friends and family and left that more as a personal decision. But when it comes to gatherings and business events, the official government guidance still says that you need to be maintaining social distance between households. And it also specifies that face coverings need to be worn, apart from eating and drinking if you're seated and if you're exempt. So we are still looking at face coverings in indoor situations. For food and drink service at step 3, unfortunately, networking and stand-up receptions aren't permitted. The guidance says that all food and alcohol must be table served. If there's no alcohol served on the premises, so if it's more of a cafe type venue, then you can order and collect your food from a counter, but you should be eating or drinking at a table. So if you had sort of receptions planned, then you can still do them. You just need to be careful about how they need to be seated. If you're going to if you want networking, it might need to be more structured, speed dating style, and the food will have to be, individually served to tables and not sharing style canapes and platters. You can still do buffet, but it needs to be served to a table. The other thing that's in play at the moment is that there's no requirement in the government guidance for testing or gaining vaccination status. That is your own personal decision, whether or not you put that in place. It's up to your risk assessment, basically, whether or not that's what that's needed. I'll have a quick look at the questions, actually, because the next bit is a bit more about sort of where we go. So what have we got? So Emily's put that FAQs in. Sorry, Emily, go ahead. What have we got?
So that's gone on the FAQs and where to find it on the site. So we have a question. Do you need to record the business objectives to prove your event is a legitimate business event in the risk assessment or as a separate document?
Completely up to you, but I love the thought that you're already thinking about recording it. Yes, I'd have it written down somewhere. It can be meeting minutes, it can be in the risk assessment, it can be the working document, something that acknowledges the guidance, links to the guidance, says this is what we are following and this is our interpretation of it and why our event fits into it. So it doesn't matter, put it anywhere you want as long as you've got it somewhere. Food and alcohols, yes, it's table service even outside, I'm afraid. The 30 limit outdoors, this is where it comes down to interpretation. If it's a business event, there's no 30 limit. You can go up to 4,000 outdoors. You still need to social distance within that group, but you can go as high as you want. The 30 limit is a social. If it's not a business event, that's where the 30 limit comes in. As an inspector, they could take a very dim view of, a whole load of people who are gathered and say that they're not together, but actually they really are together. I personally don't like the idea of a venue selling, for group space, but they're all on tables of 6, so they are considered as individual groups. Well, no, they're not. You've taken a booking for 100 people. Just because you've put them on tables of 6, it's still 100 people that are gathering inside. That's my personal view. I can't tell you what an inspector would say of it. Okay, so if you're a restaurant and event space with seating outside and then have a public gala event, I might have to take that one offline because there's so many different levels to that one. Who was that?
That's from
Cassandra. Okay. I'll have to have a look at that one with you later, Cassandra, because there's a lot of things going in there. There's restaurant guidance, there's event guidance, there's public events and individual groups on tables. Yes, if they're genuinely individual groups, you can have up to 4,000. So if you're arranging a public event, a food festival or a camping show or something like that, if people are attending genuinely in their household and sitting on tables of 6, that's fine. You can go up to 4,000. The problem comes is if that event is all organised for a single group of people. I hope that's kind of clarified that one.
There's a question about a private fete for a school, which is obviously considered as a charity. Can this happen? 200 people outdoors?
I'd say that would be covered under the charity events exemption. Yes, but again, you do need to maintain social distancing between your groups and they can't be mingling. So it needs to be quite a structured charity fair.
Okay, and then we've got the South of England show happened last week. Are these types of events, including festivals, allowed with reduced numbers?
Yes. Yeah. Same kind of answer. As long as the individual groups are household groups, then you're allowed to do big events with individual people. The problem comes when we try and do a big event with a single group of people.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's just one more about a business launch event. So Marie says, if I understand correct, this wouldn't be permitted.
Oh, what? Sorry?
A business launch event.
No, I think that very much would count as a work purpose exemption. So you're allowed to gather for work purposes, and that sounds like a reasonably necessary purpose. If you need to launch your business, you need to launch your business. So that would be the way I would see that is under the work exemptions. So you'd be allowed up to 1,000 indoors or 4,000 outdoors for that. But you have to maintain social distancing amongst your attendees and no drinks service stood up and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, okay. And then there's just one more on the bottom. And then, so it says, sorry, I'm not clear on this. For corporate business meetings indoors, this can be in a venue at 50% capacity or maximum 100 people. Is that right?
It's 1,000.
1,000 people.
Yes, that's correct, Natalie.
Yeah.
At step 3, that's the allowed thing. The thing to consider is a venue can make their own decisions and decide they don't want to do that for their own reasons, but legally and within the guidance, that's what's suggested. That's what's advised, if you like.
Yeah. Okay, and I think I've just missed this one earlier, so this lady's put it on again. Where do we stand on awards events inside a client's office, a canteen or an outside terrace?
Ooh, inside an office. I don't know if an office would be considered a permitted venue. Canteen outdoor. I think in the spirit of the law, that would be allowed because the office is going to have a COVID secure risk assessment attached to it. The awards event is allowed under the events guidance, and the canteen would also have a existing COVID secure risk assessment. So I think, again, if you just make a statement that says those 3 things, the venue is this, and they have a risk assessment. The canteen is here, and they have a risk assessment. And we are running an awards event. Here's the guidance. And overall, here's our event risk assessment. Then I think that satisfies all of your requirements. I think that would be allowed. Again, with social distancing and all the service requirements. Okay.
Yeah, I think that covers everything for the time being on there.
Okay, good. Right. Well, I'll carry on for a little bit about what might be happening in the future. So the health and safety considerations that we've got now in step 3 are mandated in law. You have to do a risk assessment, and mandated in the law is that the gathering organizer is the person responsible for organizing the gathering, and the manager is the management of the premises. And it just says that, oh, hang on, so I'll go back to it, the definition. So it says that the gathering organizer, or as the case may be, the manager. So I think it's a double act between a venue and a planner. I don't think it sits with either one, and the legislation doesn't give us any hints. But for me, it needs to be a two-way thing, because what the venue suggests might not quite work with what you want to do, and what you want to do might not quite work for the venue. So please do make sure that you're doing these things together, rather than independently of each other. It also states, and this is the tricky bit with this regulation, this legislation, it refers to the guidance. So when you hear lots of media headlines going, oh, well, it's only guidance, it's not legally binding, which is true most of the time, we're in a slightly different position, because in this legislation, which is legally binding, there is the statement that you must take into account any guidance issued by the government which is relevant to the gathering. So if you're not taking that guidance into account, you're potentially in breach of this law. So as long as you've got that statement that says, I've taken this guidance into account, and this is my interpretation of it, you're okay. They might disagree with your interpretation of it, at which point they'll probably just advise and ask you to change what you're doing or whatever. But unfortunately, I should add, they do legally, they being the local authority inspectors, they do have the potential and the power, the legal authority to close events down just on their own merit. Not merit, but on their own risk assessment. So it doesn't matter, unfortunately, however good your stuff is, that there is this power for the LA to come in and go, nah, not on my watch, I'm not having it, it's too risky, there might be an outbreak and I don't want that associated with my council. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about that. But if you've got the guidance and you've shown that you've considered the guidance, you're not in breach of any laws. Okay. So that's what the legal situation is at the moment for risk assessment and carrying out events, or permitted gatherings as they're called, and there's the definitions. Now when we questions, Emily, are they something I'll do now, or should I do those later?
Yes, should we do another one now?
Is there about risk assessment?
Yes, so it's about local authorities. So have there been any incidents of local authorities stopping events at the final hour?
Yes, the Southampton Boat Show last year was closed the day before it should have opened. It's terrible, but that's the situation we're in. There's guidance that's been issued to councils to try and stop that happening, but ultimately it comes down to one inspector's attitude to risk. That legislation is hopefully going to be, it expires in line with this date. I can't remember, it's the 17th or the 21st of July, but it's around that date. I think it's this, I don't know, don't quote me. But so that will be hopefully lifted if they don't extend that. So beyond the 19th of July, assuming that goes ahead and we now enter step 4, there will be no legal limits on gatherings. We don't need to worry about work exemptions. We don't need to worry about numbers. We don't need to worry about justifying what we're doing, because there will be no restrictions on how many people can gather together, indoor or outdoor. So that's what we're aiming for. What we don't know is whether there will be guidance and whether that guidance will be referenced in legislation the way it is now. And this is what we are desperately lobbying, HBAA and the like are trying to get ahead of. But the general health and safety picture will remain that as event organisers, as employers, as businesses, we have a health and safety responsibility to keep people safe under the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, the Health and Safety at Work Act. We still need to be doing normal risk assessments. But we would hope that COVID just becomes a line, or 3 or 4 or 5, but that COVID becomes part of your normal risk assessment. So it's still there. You know, if you think about food poisoning as a good example, in risk assessments that I used to write in the past for just normal events, I'd have a line that said, the risk is delegate gets food poisoning. What am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to check that the hotel is trained in food safety. I'm going to check that the certificates are up to date. I'm going to physically be on site to make sure the buffet hasn't sat there for 4 hours. And we're going to, I don't know what, but you know, that you put down what you do to stop a guest getting food poisoning. So I imagine we will still be doing that in the future. This is what I'm going to do to reduce the risk of someone catching COVID at my event. So it will still be there. It just hopefully will be a lot less onerous and will be a lot less obvious. You know, I think there'll be stuff that happens that will keep happening. Hand hygiene, posters that ask people not to sneeze and spread things everywhere. You know, a proper approach to arrivals, maybe less of a bun fight and things like that, you know, so that that first experience is a little bit more controlled. Because there's lots that you can do to make things safer that don't really affect the guest experience or really kind of affect what you're doing. So I think that sort of stuff's going to stay. So really quick rundown of my crystal ball stuff is that hopefully this is all coming because we'll get the vaccination impact that we need. The thing that clients need to be considering is reputational risk, because you're very unlikely to get sued for someone catching COVID. You can't possibly work out that that's where they got it from. But if there is an outbreak that is associated with your event, then it's reputational risk that needs to be the main consideration, I think. So I've said about less legislation. It'll be more focused on your risk assessment for what measures need to be in place. We may have some guidance still. They may still ask us to consider things where possible, but hopefully it will be very open to our own interpretation, and particularly for social distancing and face coverings. I think the important thing is to remember that people may still want to distance. And if you force them into an area where they can't, that's not good for mental safety. So I think generally speaking, we need to try and give people a bit more space, even when we don't have to. International travel, unfortunately, is going to be problematic for a while. And I can see that there's going to be increased input and liaison with local authorities as, you know, bigger venues do bigger events and things like that. I think people who may not have needed any kind of interaction with local authority before might need to have a conversation. You know, if you're the first one doing 500 at Celtic Manor, you might find that the LA are interested in having a chat. And I also think that normal expectations will start to emerge. So we will have guidance about what's suggested, but there will also be what's normal. And if people come to your event and what's normal isn't happening, and then there's an outbreak, you could have some horrible noise going around about, yeah, and they didn't even test us. You know, so if testing becomes normal, then if you don't test, it could make people feel a little bit unsafe. So I think that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on what becomes the sort of industry standard for these sorts of things and what our guests actually want to see from that reassurance, from that confidence perspective. So some really quick top tips. I think the main one is just have a plan B for social distancing to come back. It's really hard to do that last minute. So either have a plan to reduce your numbers, get some extra space, go hybrid, or change your format so that it's staggered or rotations or something like that. Just have it at the back of your mind in case as we go into the winter, we need to do something else. And basically make sure that you're budgeting for that sort of thing as well. And be honest with everybody and your clients and your suppliers, you know, have really transparent conversations about what you're doing and remain as agile as possible with your terms. I think everyone's kind of up to that date anyway, but, you know, also be flexible with your event rather than your date. So don't necessarily look at rescheduling things. See if you can actually reformat it and let it still happen. It's really important that you're staying up to date on the information and the guidance that's issued by the government. It changes all the time. So you need to know where it is and where to recognise the changes and what's important for you and the events that you run for you or your clients. And same with the industry guidance. So there's several out there that are really useful. They're very detailed. They give some really specific information on what you can and, well, not what you can and can't do. They give really specific information on how you can do it safely. And we're expecting big changes to all of that as we move into step 4. So if you've signed up already for our updates, or if you access that download that we just put in at the beginning, you will then be on the list to get updates as and when we get them, so you can check in and get your information there, and go to events. You know, if you get invited to live things, go. See what's happening, see what everyone else is doing and how it feels as a delegate, and then share. You know, we need to get as much imagery and discussions around live events out in social media, in normal media. You know, if people see it happening, it will build confidence as a nice upward spiral, hopefully. So information and guidance, I've just told you that. And this is all the ways you can follow us at Brightspace. We do training. We've got 2 courses. So if you need to do risk assessments and you don't know where to start, then we've got a course that's half online and then half a workshop with me where we run through that. Or if you just need, or people in your organization just need a broader view of COVID secure events, we've got a purely online course. It's a few hours. You can obviously do it whenever you like. And we've actually got a discount available on that online course at the moment. So it's a 30% discount off the price that's valid for a week. So the code for that is webinar 30. And if you want to access that, then the links are there.